The wind came in sheets, slapping dust against the planked walls of the Pony Express relay station like an angry hand. It worried the canvas awnings until the seams snapped, until every tie groaned. Elias Crow stood under the porch beam and watched the trackless horizon as if the sight might answer him. The relays were supposed to be punctual. The West, however, preferred to be cruel on its own schedule. Elias had been raised to the rhythms of the mail, the hush before a rider arrives, the quick exchange of leather pouches, the measured cheers that were mostly for the men inside the station, and the horses who understood only the next mile. In the bright season, he could keep those rhythms steady even when the prairie heat shimmered. Now, with cold working its way into the boards and storms roving in from the north like livestock, nothing stayed steady. Not the barometer, not the water barrel, not the nerves of the men and women who kept the relay running. 2 days earlier, a rider had staggered in, coat torn and hat missing. He had clutched the pouch with fingers raw from rope burn, eyes too bright, mouth too dry. Elias had seen the man's lips crack when he tried to speak, and it told him it was enough. The message would ride on. The horse would be traded. The station would do what it always did, keep moving. But the rider hadn't been the only thing to arrive in Elias's life that season. On the third day, when the sky had been low and bruised, Merritt Sloan rode up from the West Road and asked for water like he belonged to the place. Merritt didn't belong anywhere. Elias had sensed that the moment the outlaw dismounted. The man's saddle was clean enough, the boots less so. He didn't limp, though his coat carried old soot stains near the hem where the prairie had tried to burn him. He carried his hunger in silence. Elias had offered water anyway, part habit, part the refusal to add one more sin to the list a man carried. Merritt had accepted, then watched the relay's preparations with the calm of someone scouting prey. He asked about the mail pouch, not with greed in his voice, but with certainty, like he already knew what it contained. Elias had told him the pouch wasn't for him. Elias had expected anger. Instead, Merritt had smiled, thin, as if the smile hurt his face, and said that when people tried to run from trouble, trouble always found a different door. That was the day Elias first heard of the Apache woman. A name came through the station with the next rider, Delphine Yazzie. Not Delphine as in the bookish women in towns, Delphine as a sound someone had learned carefully so they wouldn't insult the person behind it. The rider said she had been seen near the crossing of the creek where the Pony Express track bent around a rise of cedar. He said she moved like she was searching for something she couldn't name. He said she'd been alone, then suddenly not, as if the land itself had decided to hide her and reveal her at random. The story had traveled faster than the mail pouches. A homesteader's wife whispered it while mending a strap. A stable hand spat and muttered that women who walked without escorts were begging for trouble. Elias, for his part, had listened without making sense of it. He told himself he didn't have time for rumors. He told himself he had enough trouble already, enough cold in the boards, enough rationed coffee that tasted like burnt water, enough worry about horses that were tired of carrying men who believed the next station would save them. Then the storm broke. It wasn't a simple storm. It was a winter that tasted of iron and took long minutes to decide whether it meant harm. Clouds lowered until the world looked muffled, as if the sky had pulled down a curtain. Rain started first, sharp as needles, then shifted into sleet. Somewhere out on the track, a mule screamed once and fell silent. Elias heard the sound first, hooves too uneven for a horse moving at full command, hooves too close for a rider arriving in planned fashion. Then he smelled blood, metallic and cold. He stepped outside and the air hit him like a fist. The wind cut through the station's porch like it had a purpose. Elias shaded his eyes with one gloved hand and looked down the muddy trail. There, stumbling out of the gray, was a figure wrapped in a blanket. It could have been a man in the dark, the way the storm blurred shapes. But when the figure raised her head, Elias saw the delicate curve of her chin beneath soot-dark hair. Delphine Yazzie. Elias recognized her by the description the rider had given. The particular stillness in the way the person held herself, as if even exhaustion did not erase the memory of command. She fell to her knees in the mud, palms splayed, and Elias was already moving before he had time to make a rule about it. His boots slid on wet boards as he ran down the steps. He called her name once, then again, but the storm swallowed the words. Delphine looked up anyway. Her eyes, deep brown, clear despite the cold, found him. The look held something that wasn't just fear, it held warning. Elias reached her and knelt close, feeling the heat drain from her body in slow, terrifying increments. Her skin was chilled to the bone. A rawness showed beneath the blanket's edges, a bruise along her ribs that had been pressed hard, and a cut at her shoulder where leather had rubbed too much too fast. The storm streaked her hair with rain and smeared grit into her lashes. "What happened?" Elias asked. He sounded steadier than he felt. Delphine tried to answer. Her lips moved, but no words came. She swallowed once, then coughed. Each cough dragged air like a rope through her chest. Elias made a decision with no time for debate. He turned her careful weight toward his station, hauling her under the awning. The wood boards creaked under her shift. Inside, the air smelled of wet leather and old coal. He laid her on a pallet near the stove. "Get water!" Elias called toward the back room where one of his station hands had been trying to patch a saddle strap with hands that shook from cold. The hand, young, barely grown, darted out and returned with a bucket. Elias didn't want water. He wanted heat, a steady warmth to keep Delphine's body from shutting down. He found the flannel blanket stacked near the cook stove and wrapped her in layers. He rubbed her arms slowly, feeling the tremor that wouldn't stop. When she flinched, he paused, then adjusted with the gentleness of a man who'd learned what desperation did to pride. Delphine's gaze stayed on him. For a time she watched as if studying how he moved. Then her eyes slid toward the doorway. "Outlaw," she rasped at last, the word barely audible under the wind. "Behind." Elias went still. He hadn't told her about Merritt Sloan, hadn't told her anything about rumors, yet she spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already lived through the danger. Outside, hooves sounded again. Merritt Sloan rode into the storm as if the weather owed him a debt. His horse was lathered and wild-eyed. Water ran down its flanks, turning the animal's coat darker by the minute. Merritt didn't slow. He guided the horse into the station yard, then dismounted and stood with his duster dripping. He looked at Elias first, then he looked at Delphine, laid out near the stove. Merritt's mouth tightened, but his eyes didn't soften. He stepped inside without asking permission, carrying the cold with him like a second shadow. Elias stood between Merritt and Delphine. Elias felt a kind of anger ignite, not hot enough to be reckless, but sharp enough to guide his hands. "She came to me," Elias said. "She's hurt." Merritt's gaze moved over Elias's shoulder to the blankets, then back to Elias's face. "She wouldn't have made it to your porch if I hadn't ridden past the way she fell," Merritt said. His voice was rough and careful, like he didn't use words unless he meant to spend them. "Storm throws folks away. I only saw her first." Delphine stirred. Her head turned slightly. Her eyes found Merritt, and the expression there shifted, as if each emotion had a different mask. Merritt's jaw worked. "She's Apache," Merritt said, not as accusation, but as fact. "I know what her kind costs to protect." Elias's stomach tightened. He heard something ugly inside the man's words, something about payment, about value measured in risk. Delphine drew a breath that rattled. "You took," she began, then stopped to fight for air. Merritt stepped closer. His boots tracked mud onto the boards. "I didn't take," he corrected. "I followed. You don't know the half of what people do to survive. Not when they're hunted." Elias watched Delphine's face. Her lips were cracked. Her shoulders lifted and fell like she was rowing against the current of cold. Elias realized with a slow, sinking feeling that Merritt wasn't merely an outlaw with a taste for violence. He was involved. He was part of a story that had already begun before Elias saw Delphine on the trail. Elias did not like the shape of that realization. He had promised himself he would not invite danger into the station. Yet the danger had already arrived, first in the form of a woman who couldn't walk, then in the form of Merritt Sloan, who carried his own storm inside him. Delphine's eyes fluttered. "Don't," she whispered, and then her voice snapped into something firmer, something that sounded like command even through pain. "Don't let him ride." Elias looked toward Merritt. "Who are you?" Elias asked. Merritt's expression flickered, annoyance, then something like respect. "I'm the man you'll meet in a ditch if you keep asking questions," he said. "I'm the man who knows this relay's route. I'm the man whose horse drank from a trough that used to belong to a family that didn't get paid." Elias didn't understand all of it. The West demanded that men understand pieces without receiving the whole. He understood one thing clearly. Merritt had come for the mail. Elias glanced toward the back room where the pouch would be stored until the rider left. He saw the locked chest, saw the latch glint even in gray light. Delphine's eyes followed his glance, and a kind of grim urgency rose in them. "You think he'll only steal mail," she said. "He'll steal more." Merritt turned his head slightly toward her, as if listening against his will. "What she means," Merritt said, "is that folks like you pay for mercy with blood. You took her in. Now you'll pay again when it comes due." Elias's hands tightened into fists. He moved toward the chest, placing himself between Merritt and the lock. Delphine's breath came short. "Elias," she said suddenly. The way she spoke his name stunned him. He hadn't told it. She'd met him in the storm only minutes ago. Elias stared at her. Delphine's gaze didn't waver. "They call you Crow," she said softly. "But you're not." Her voice faltered. She coughed, and when she did, a dark smear appeared at the corner of her mouth. Blood, mixed with rain from her lungs. Elias felt the room tilt. He bent closer, pressing his palm to her forehead, feeling the heat there rise in a fever that could be the beginning of healing or the beginning of dying. Outside, another sound cut through the storm, the sharp crack of a gunshot. Then another. The outlaw problem had shifted from talk to action. Elias hurried to the window and peered out between shifting curtains. Riders moved in the distance, silhouettes whipping through rain. A second wagon might have been there, but the storm and darkness made certainty impossible. Merritt's eyes narrowed as if he recognized the sound. "They're not mine," Merritt said. "That's the thing about storms. They bring everyone." Delphine's eyes sharpened. "They're the ones who—" She swallowed. "They're the ones who took the children." Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with weather. He had heard whispers of Apache raids and retaliations. In towns, those whispers turned into easy stories, one side brutal, the other side righteous. But sitting there with Delphine's trembling breath, Elias could feel how much those stories lied. The West didn't divide neatly into heroes and villains. It divided into people trying to keep breathing. The shooting outside continued. It wasn't close enough to see faces, but it was close enough to know the station was in danger. Elias turned back toward Delphine. "Can you walk?" he asked. Delphine tried to shake her head. The gesture failed. Her body trembled. "No," she whispered, "but I can." She reached with fingers that shook toward the leather band around her waist. Elias moved to help. When he loosened the knot, he expected a small pouch, maybe a family charm, maybe a tool. Instead, he pulled out a folded paper, brittle with rain and stained along the creases. A letter. Delphine's eyes met Elias's, and for a moment Elias saw something like fear settle in her expression. Not fear of death, but fear of what truth could cost. "Read," she said. Elias opened the paper carefully. The ink had run in places. He recognized the style of official writing, stamped seals, the kind used by men who believed ink could command the land. His stomach tightened as he read. The letter described Delphine as property, an Apache woman assigned to a homestead settlement contract. Not a prisoner in chain and fence, not a slave in a house. Something subtler and crueler. A woman documented as a payment. Elias looked up at Delphine. Merritt saw the shock cross Elias's face and let out a quiet breath. "So you see," Merritt said, "it isn't only guns, it's paper. Folks sign their sins and call it law." Delphine's voice turned steady. "My mother," she began, then broke into a shuddering inhale. "My people, before winter, before the salt dried their stores, they tried to trade me for passage." Elias could barely breathe. Delphine's fingers tightened. I ran to the only route that carries truth, mail. If I got the letters to the right man, maybe—" Her eyes flickered. "Maybe he could stop it." Elias didn't know who he was. Delphine spoke as if the name existed somewhere between the lines. Outside, the gunfire stopped. A heavy silence followed. In that silence, Elias heard horses stamping, men shouting farther away, the storm continuing to spit cold. Then, from beyond the window, a rider's silhouette approached the station gate. A man in a dark coat dismounted, leading his horse in by rope. He moved like someone who had done this before and intended to finish. Merritt saw him too. The outlaw's shoulders went tight. Elias understood at once. Merritt hadn't come to save Delphine. Merritt had come because he feared the same men now approaching. The visitor pushed open the door without knocking. Elias didn't recognize him. His hair was dark and wet, his face hard enough to be carved. He held a revolver low, not yet raised, but ready. "My business is with the woman," the man said. His gaze slid to Delphine and stayed there as if she were the only thing worth seeing. "Where's the pouch?" he asked. Elias's thoughts snapped into place. The pouch in the chest was the relay's heart. The outlaw who wanted it had to do more than steal mail. He had to intercept the letters Delphine carried, the letters that could challenge the contract. Merritt stepped forward. "Don't touch her," he said. The stranger's smile was ugly and brief. "Merritt Sloan," he said, like the name was a curse. "Still lying to yourself?" Merritt's eyes flashed. "I'm not here for the mail." The stranger's gaze returned to Elias. "You're in the middle. That's your mistake." Elias felt Delphine's eyes on him. She wasn't watching to be rescued like a symbol. She was watching to measure what kind of man he was. Elias lifted his chin. "This station has rules," he said. The stranger laughed. "Rules? On a relay line? The only law out here is who has the faster draw." He stepped into the room. Elias backed one step, then another, until his shoulder brushed the stove. Heat rose, but it didn't warm his blood. He realized that even with the stove blazing, this room could become a slaughterhouse in a heartbeat. Delphine's breath shuddered. She reached for the paper and pressed it into Elias's hand. "Stop him," she whispered. Elias understood then what she truly meant. It wasn't only about saving her life. It was about saving her identity from becoming someone else's documented property. Elias didn't have time to contemplate the moral weight. The stranger moved, slow but certain, toward the chest. Merritt moved first. He sprang between the stranger and the locked drawer with a speed that surprised Elias. Merritt had the outlaw's reflexes, quick, violent, precise. The revolver in the stranger's hand snapped up. A shot rang through the room. Glass on the window rattled. Heat burned Elias's ears. Merritt went down hard, sliding across the boards. Elias lunged toward him, grabbing Merritt's coat to pull him back from the line of danger. Merritt's eyes were open, wide with shock, as if he couldn't understand being hit. "Idiot," Merritt rasped, blood blooming at his shoulder. Elias looked at him, then back to Delphine. Delphine had gone pale. Her fingers were clutching the edge of the pallet, knuckles whitening. The stranger's revolver swung toward Elias. Elias moved in that split second before the shot could come. He grabbed the iron poker from the stove and lifted it like a club. The stranger smirked, clearly assuming Elias's tool was too crude to matter. Elias didn't swing for elegance. He swung to buy time. The poker struck the stranger's wrist and forced the revolver downward just enough. The stranger cursed and shoved Elias away. Elias staggered, pain stinging his ribs. Delphine made a sound, half plea, half command. "Elias!" Elias looked at her, breath ragged. Delphine's eyes had turned sharp again. She reached for the blanket and pulled herself up onto one elbow with a grim, stubborn determination that made Elias's heart twist. "I told you," she said. "Don't let him ride." Elias didn't know what "him" meant until he realized the stranger wasn't only after the pouch. The stranger intended to take the woman, and the woman's paperwork, and the mail's contents, turning all of it into proof for claims. The gunman approached again. Elias stood, wincing, then moved toward the back room where the pouch waited in the chest. He had to decide whether to obey the relay's rules or the deeper rule of human survival. He opened the chest. Inside lay the mail pouch and, strapped beneath it, the spare, lead-lined canister used for urgent documents. Elias took both and thrust them into his own coat. The gunman saw the motion. He lunged. Elias shoved past him and grabbed the door latch. A storm-sick wind battered the doorway. Elias ran outside because inside was a trap. Outside, he could use the terrain, the darkness, the mess of weather that made pursuit uncertain. He ran with the pouch and canister in his arms, mud soaking his boots. Behind him, he heard shouts and the quick thud of men moving. Delphine's voice cut through one moment of chaos. "Elias! Under the wagon, now!" Elias looked and saw the wagon he kept for supplies, its canvas sides torn and its wheels half buried. Under the wagon bed, there was a space where a man could hide if he had enough courage to be small. He slid under, pulling the pouch close, pressing the canister into the dirt. Rain fell in needles. He could smell iron and wet wood. He waited, heart pounding. He expected gunfire. He expected to die. But instead he heard something else. Footsteps pausing, then Delphine's breathing, measured and strained. Then Elias heard Merritt Sloane's voice. "You're going the wrong way," Merritt called, weak but firm. Elias's head turned as much as the darkness allowed. Merritt had followed them outside. He moved carefully, using the wagon frame to steady himself. Blood soaked his coat, making dark blooms along the seams. The gunman stood in the yard with his revolver pointed, deciding whether Merritt was worth finishing. Delphine stumbled out of the station door and pressed her weight against the porch post. Even in pain, she held herself upright, as if her body refused to become a surrender. The gunman's gaze snapped to her. "You," he said. Delphine lifted the paper Elias had read, the letter damp and heavy in her hand. "This," she said. Her voice carried in a way Elias didn't expect. It wasn't loud. It was steady. The gunman's expression darkened. "You think that document protects you?" Delphine's eyes flicked toward Elias's hiding spot, toward the wagon beneath which Elias tried to breathe without making noise. "It protects the truth," Delphine answered. The gunman took a step closer. "The truth out here belongs to whoever can hold a pistol." Merritt laughed once, a harsh sound like a stick snapping. "No," he said. "The truth belongs to whoever rides it first." His gaze moved to the relay horse, one of the station's reserves, hardy and patient, its mane crusted with ice from sleet. He nodded toward the saddle. "Elias has the pouch. He'll ride whether you want it or not." Elias felt his breath snag. Merritt knew. Merritt had seen Elias's choice through the window, understood the relay's heart. Merritt was trying to protect the mail, trying to stop the men who hunted Delphine from grabbing what mattered. But Merritt was injured. He wouldn't ride away. Delphine's eyes softened, just a fraction. Then they hardened again. "You can't," she whispered to Merritt, as if she meant more than the physical act of riding. Merritt met her gaze. "I can," he said. "Not by leaving, by staying long enough for someone else to live." The gunman raised his revolver. Delphine moved. She didn't run. She stepped forward, forcing herself between Merritt and the revolver like a shield despite her weakness. She lifted the letter in one hand and made a gesture that Elias recognized from rumor, something like a warning sign. A ceremonial movement translated into emergency. The gunman hesitated. It wasn't respect, it was calculation. Men out here were superstition and greed wearing the same coat. Delphine's movement carried a strange authority, an old power made new by the moment. Merritt used the pause. He lunged, knocking the gunman's aim offline. The revolver fired. The bullet struck the wagon wheel with a metallic shriek. Elias flinched under the wagon, dirt filling his nose. Then gunfire erupted in the yard from other directions, men arriving, not all under the gunman's control. The storm had scattered them like seeds, and now they were finding one another. Elias could barely hear the details, but he could hear urgency. He could hear Delphine speaking, her voice twisting between command and plea. Merritt shouted, "Elias, go!" Elias crawled out from under the wagon, joints stiff and hands muddy. He grabbed the mail pouch and canister, then ran for the station's horse. The reserve horse reared as he approached, but the urgency in Elias's hands steadied it. Elias swung himself onto the saddle. His coat slapped the animal's ribs as he tied the pouch strap. Delphine stood in the yard as if the storm had not taken her strength. Merritt was on one knee, breathing hard, blood slick on the boards. Elias wanted to look away from Merritt. Elias wanted to obey his instincts and flee, but Delphine's eyes pinned him. "Go to Jules' Hart," she said, voice thin. "Tell him the contract is forged. Tell him—" She broke off and swallowed. Then she finished, quieter. "Tell him my name is Delphine Yazzie, not a price." Elias's heart twisted. "And you?" he asked, the question breaking into helplessness. Delphine's gaze flicked toward Merritt. "I'm where I have to be," she said. Elias didn't understand until later that she meant the station, the relay line, the place where truth could be carried forward. She meant staying alive long enough for the message to arrive. He urged the horse forward. The saddle creaked under him, and the horse surged into the storm. Elias rode with the mail pouch and canister pressed tight against his chest. Rain soaked his hat brim. Wind tried to peel his coat away. Behind him, shots cracked again. Shouts rose. A part of Elias wanted to turn back. But the relay wasn't only a route, it was a promise. The West ran on promises like rails ran on iron. Elias rode. He rode until his arms ached and his vision blurred. He rode until the storm became a wall of sound and he could no longer tell whether he was seeing the ground or dreaming it. When he finally reached the next relay station, the man on duty looked at Elias with shock as Elias stumbled off the horse. The station hand reached for him, then recoiled at the soaked mail pouch. "Urgent!" Elias rasped. He pushed the canister into the other man's hands. "To Jules' Hart! Now! Don't open it! Don't delay!" The man's eyes widened. "What happened back there?" Elias tried to answer and found he couldn't. His throat felt full of rain and grief. He watched the other man run inside, watched the exchange of seal and receipt, watched the next horse be saddled. Then Elias sank onto a barrel and stared at his own shaking hands. He had done the job, but he couldn't let himself believe Delphine and Merritt had survived. The next days stretched thin as wire. Elias rode onward to keep the line moving, taking shifts and relieving tired men. He told himself the relay's rhythm was the only way to keep from breaking. Yet every time he heard the distant call of a horse, every time he smelled wet leather, he pictured Delphine on the pallet near the stove, and Merritt stepping between the gunman and the woman he shouldn't have cared about. When the letters finally arrived at Jules' Hart's hands, the law did what it could. Jules' Hart was a man with connections to the territory's administrators, a person who believed in paperwork enough to use it as a weapon. He didn't arrive with angels. He arrived with men, with subpoenas, with the kind of cold authority that followed cash and ink. Still, even ink couldn't mend broken bones. Elias learned bits and pieces, as the West does, through fragments, through travelers, through the way people looked away when they couldn't bear to say the worst. Delphine had been recovered from the yard during the confusion. She hadn't died on Elias's porch, not that day. She'd been carried into safety by a small group of neighbors who didn't ask whether the right thing was profitable. Merritt had not been as lucky. He was alive, but not unbroken. His shoulder had taken the worst of the injury. He had lost blood and strength, and some part of his life had gone quiet. Rumors said the gunman who'd come for Delphine was arrested, partly because of the paperwork, partly because the men who had followed Merritt were forced to confess under questioning that included both money and pain. But other rumors filled the gaps. Some said the outlaws weren't truly punished. Some said the law only pretended. Elias couldn't tell which rumor was worse. The West didn't love straightforward justice. It loved delayed consequences. One evening, while the sky held a low bruise of cloud and the air tasted like snow that hadn't decided to fall, Elias returned to the relay station. He arrived with a new pouch for the next run and a quiet, stubborn hope that wouldn't admit itself. Delphine wasn't on the porch. The stove was clean but not warm. The wagon had been repaired in hasty, rough fashion. There were scorch marks in the yard that no rain could scrub away. Elias walked inside. He found Delphine in a corner room, sitting upright despite her fatigue. A blanket covered her legs. Her hair, damp from healing sweat, lay in a messy braid over her shoulder. Someone had stitched new leather onto her bandolier where it had been torn. When she saw Elias, her expression didn't bloom into relief like a simple story. It tightened first. Then, slowly, it softened. Elias stopped near the doorway, not sure where he belonged in her world. He'd watched her fight with the courage of someone who refused to be claimed. He'd watched her give him a mission, then give Merritt the shield of her body. He owed her more than the relay could deliver. "You came back," Delphine said. Elias swallowed. "You were in danger." Delphine's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the night beyond. "Danger isn't finished," she replied. "Not with paper and not with guns." Her voice carried an ache that made Elias step closer. Elias looked at her hands. They were scarred in places. He thought of the letter he'd read and realized the scars weren't only from wounds. They were from survival. Survival that had asked her to become her own guard. "I rode to Jules' heart," Elias said. He listened. "The contract—" Delphine closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her gaze held something like exhaustion and gratitude tangled together. "It was forged," she said. "The man who tried to buy me used signatures from a time my people didn't know as law." Elias's chest tightened. "So it's done?" Delphine's mouth turned into a thin, sad line. "No." She leaned forward slightly and her eyes met his. "It's only changed hands," she said. "Now my people will demand what should have been theirs from the beginning. Demand it with words and witnesses. And men will still try to stop us, because stopping is cheaper than honoring." Elias didn't know how to argue. He could only understand the truth she spoke. The West could change laws without changing hearts. "Then why are you here?" Elias asked, hearing the question he'd avoided since the storm. Delphine looked down at her blanket wrap, fingers tracing a seam. "Because Merritt brought me," she said. Elias flinched. "Brought you?" Delphine nodded slowly. Elias expected her to say Merritt had saved her with a gunshot and then fled into the night. That had been the shape of the story Elias wanted to tell himself because it was simpler. Delphine's voice broke the simplicity. "Before the storm," she said, "Merritt followed me. Not to steal, not to sell, to find out who was trying to purchase me." Elias blinked. Delphine continued. "He knew the names because he used to be part of the men who signed those papers. He left because he saw what the papers did to women who couldn't read the language of ownership. He told himself he had changed." Elias stared at her. "And then?" he asked. Delphine's eyes hardened. "Then he saw the same hands move again, hands he recognized from old crimes." Elias looked away, guilt rising like heat. Merritt had looked dangerous, and Elias had treated him like a threat. Yet Merritt had bled to stop the threat. Delphine touched her own shoulder where the injury had been. "He was supposed to ride away," she said. "He told me he couldn't do it. He said the outlaw life had rules, and you never broke them unless you were ready to die." Elias's throat tightened. "He stayed," Elias said. Delphine's gaze lifted to him. "He stayed," she agreed, "and that's why his life won't be the same again." A quiet knock sounded outside the door. Elias straightened. Delphine's expression shifted into something composed. "Come in," she called. Merritt Sloan entered slowly, one arm supported by a sling he'd fashioned from a torn bandana. His face was paler than Elias remembered. The burn scar across his cheek looked more pronounced in the weak lamplight. Merritt's eyes met Elias's and didn't ask for forgiveness. They asked for understanding. "I didn't die," Merritt said, like that was a fact he had to wrestle into existence. Elias stepped forward. "You saved us." Merritt's mouth twisted. "Saved is a big word." Delphine's voice softened. "He stopped the gunman," she said. "He stopped the worst." Merritt sat on a chair near the wall, wincing as if movement was a betrayal. Then his gaze drifted to Delphine. "I couldn't ride away," Merritt admitted. His words were rough but honest. "Not after I saw you with that letter. Not after I heard you say your name like it was a weapon." Delphine swallowed. "You shouldn't have cared," she whispered. Merritt's eyes flickered. "I did," he said. "And now the men who paid me once will come to pay themselves back. They'll want the mail pouch trail. They'll want the receipts. They'll want the woman they thought they owned." Elias listened, realizing the twist of the story wasn't only that an outlaw saved a homesteader's life. The bigger twist was what the outlaw had been all along. Not a random villain, not a romantic rogue, but a man who'd been complicit in paper crimes, then chose, too late and still urgently, to prevent further harm. Elias felt the moral complexity settle over the room like dust. He had come back to the station expecting to find a love story told in simple terms. Cowboy helps native woman, outlaw is a shadow, everyone rides toward peace. Instead, he found three people entangled in consequences that wouldn't disappear. Delphine looked at Elias. "The law can protect my name," she said, "but it can't protect my life forever." Elias stared at her, then at Merritt. "What do you need?" he asked. Delphine's expression shifted, and Elias felt himself fall into the steady current of her decisions. "I need a man at my side who can hold a position without becoming another weapon," she said. "You ran the relay through the storm. You carried the message. You didn't sell us to save yourself." Elias's mouth went dry. Merritt snorted once, but there was no cruelty in it. "Don't pretend you're a saint," he told Elias. "You're just stubborn." Elias's breath left him with a laugh that surprised him. Then he grew quiet again. "I can stay," Elias said. Delphine's eyes searched his face. "Stay where?" she asked. Elias looked around the station. He thought of the porch where she had collapsed. He thought of the gunshots and the scorch marks. He thought of how the West demanded movement. He thought of his horses, his route, his duties. "I can stay at the line," he said slowly. "Not ride away when the next storm comes. I can guard the station until the danger learns it can't buy its way through." Delphine studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Then stay," she said. Merritt looked away as if he was watching his own past lose its grip. "You'll become a target," he said. Elias met his eyes. "Then let it be my choice," Elias replied. Delphine reached out and took Elias's hand. Her fingers were cold at first, then warmed against his. Her touch wasn't demanding, it was grounding. It reminded Elias that love didn't always look like romance in books. Sometimes it looked like a woman refusing to die alone. Sometimes it looked like an outlaw refusing to leave someone bleeding. Elias felt his pulse slow. He squeezed her hand gently, careful not to bruise her strength. Outside, the wind eased for a moment, giving the night a thin strip of quiet. The stove settled with a quiet pop as coals shifted. Delphine tilted her head toward Elias, eyes shining with fever's remnants. "You rode away," she said. Elias's throat tightened. "I had to carry the message." "I know," she replied. Then her gaze moved to Merritt. "You didn't," Delphine added. "Not when it mattered." Merritt's face went still. "I'm still here," he said. Delphine's expression softened, and Elias could see something like relief settle in her chest. Not happiness exactly. Something braver. Acceptance. Elias's heart warmed with the knowledge that the outlaw's sacrifice had become part of the station's future. Not a tragic footnote, not a doomed romance beat, a foundation. In the days that followed, Elias didn't treat Delphine as a mystery to solve or a trophy to protect. He treated her as a person with choices. He made space for her to speak in the only language she seemed to trust fully: story, gesture, careful truth. Delphine taught him which routes avoided deep mud and which creeks held quicksand in disguise. She taught him how to read wind patterns by the way clouds dragged their bellies across the sky. She didn't ask Elias to understand Apache customs all at once. She asked him to be patient and to listen when she corrected him. Merritt recovered slowly, his body aching even when his mind was sharp. He returned to the station yard with difficulty, helping repair fences, checking the mail chest's latch, watching the horizon for trouble. He didn't ask to be forgiven, he asked for work. And Elias, surprising himself, gave it. When trouble returned, as it always did, the three of them faced it with a kind of stubborn unity that didn't look like the West's favorite heroics. There was no grand shootout that turned a town to applause. There was no sudden legal victory that washed blood away. Instead, there were quiet movements, receipts gathered, affidavits recorded, witnesses kept from being intimidated. Elias learned the shape of patience. Delphine learned what it meant to demand justice in a world that tried to barter her like a bolt of cloth. Merritt, with his burn scar and outlaw past, rode with Elias on the days Elias felt too weary to ride alone. He didn't redeem himself with a single act. He redeemed himself by staying in the consequences and doing the hard work of change. One morning, after a night of light snow that left the world softened at the edges, Elias sat with Delphine on the porch steps. The boards creaked under them. The sky looked clean for the first time in weeks. Elias held a cup of coffee so hot it steamed and tasted better than rationed bitterness. Delphine wrapped her hands around the cup, her blanket pulled tight. "You're quiet," she said. Elias stared at the track beyond the station. "I keep thinking about that moment," he replied, "when you said not to let him ride." Delphine's eyes moved to his face. "I didn't mean Merritt," she said. Elias frowned. "I thought you meant—" Delphine shook her head. "I meant the lie," she said. "The lie that people like me are worth less than what a man can sign. Don't let it ride on." Elias let out a slow breath. The revelation hit like warmth. Merritt approached then, limping but determined. He carried a small bundle of supplies, leather patches, a tin of tobacco, a spool of thread. He paused to listen to their conversation without interrupting. Elias watched the outlaw's posture, the way he stood a little straighter than before, as if choosing to belong to the next days. Merritt set the bundle down and said, "You'll have to teach me where the best stitching is, Delphine. My hands aren't as good as my aim." Delphine's mouth curved into a smile that didn't ask for permission. "I'll teach you," she replied. Elias watched them together and felt something unspool inside him, something gentle and surprising. Not the lightning bolt kind of romance, a slow burn love built from survival's truth. When Merritt stepped away to check the horses, Delphine turned back to Elias. "Do you know what I thought when I saw you in the storm?" she asked. Elias blinked. "What?" Delphine's eyes held the memory like a bead of water held on a needle. "I thought you were just another man who would do the right thing for one day," she said. "A man who would regret it later." Elias's throat tightened. "And now?" he asked. Delphine leaned in slightly, her forehead nearly touching his. "Now I think you're the man who will keep doing it," she whispered. "Even when the West tries to remind you it's easier to ride away." Elias's breath caught. He brushed his thumb lightly over her knuckles. "I don't want to ride away," he confessed. Delphine looked up into his face. "Why not?" Elias didn't have a grand speech. He had only the truth that mattered. "Because you didn't let me be a stranger," he said. "Because Merritt didn't let me be safe while someone else bled. Because I learned the mail isn't the only thing that gets carried." Delphine's eyes shimmered. "And what gets carried?" she asked. Elias held her hand and answered, voice quiet enough to belong to the porch. "Promises," he said, "and the names people fight to keep." Delphine exhaled softly, then pressed her lips to his knuckles, quick and reverent, like a vow spoken without a priest. In the distance, a rider's silhouette appeared on the track, small against the vast sky. The West never stopped testing what a person could become. Elias stood and took the reins, guiding the porch's shadow into movement. He didn't leave Delphine behind this time. He didn't make her his reason to run. He made her his reason to stay. Delphine rose, too, steadying herself with one hand on the rail. Merritt joined them at the edge of the yard, watching their small unity like it surprised him every day. And when the next pouch was delivered, Elias helped Delphine secure it, helped Merritt mend the straps, and let love settle into the station the way fire settled into a hearth. Not as a fairy tale ending, as something harder and realer, a frontier future built out of courage, complicated truth, and the decision, made again and again, not to ride away when someone is bleeding.